Welcome to Parenting Pioneers, the podcast where we journey through the vibrant communities of urban life, discovering the opportunities and challenges that await today's working parents. In a world that's changing faster than ever, how do we raise resilient, curious, and empowered kids? So whether you're navigating the digital playground, seeking local adventures, or striving for that ever-elusive work-life harmony, we're here to guide, inspire, and connect. I'm your host, David Watkins, and together we'll explore stories, strategies, and talk with experts that empower us to thrive in the parenting landscape. So parents, pioneers, let's find our way. We want to take a moment to thank our sponsor, Plan My Kids. As busy parents, we all know the stress of trying to plan and organize activities for our kids. That's where Plan My Kids comes in. They make planning and attending kids' activities easy, offering personalized programs tailored to your family's interests and needs. So if you're feeling overwhelmed with planning kids' activities, let Plan My Kids take the wheel. Visit their website at planmykids.com and start your plan today. Remember, with Plan My Kids, you got this. And most importantly, your kids know this. Thanks again to Plan My Kids for their support of the podcast. In this insightful episode of Parenting Pioneers, I sit down with Penn Perry, a seasoned camp director with over 30 years of experience, as we explore the business of play. We discuss the transformative power of structured play in developing children's social, cognitive, and teamwork skills. Penn shares his journey from being a young camp kid to becoming the executive director of Camp Trinity, learning along the way the importance of setting clear boundaries, goals, and the art of effective communication within play. The discussion also covers the critical role of staff in modeling behavior and the nuanced approach to managing success, failure, and conflict among children. Let's go find our way with Penn. Well, good day, Penn. Thank you so much for joining the podcast. I'm excited to have a conversation to you about the business of play and how structured play can help children.
Hi, how are you? Good to see
Good,
you. I'm glad to
good,
be here.
good. Just to help the audience, can you share a little bit about your background and your time at Camp Trinity?
Sure. First and foremost, I think it's always important to say I'm a camp kid. So I went to camp as a child, and I have a 30-year history, 30-plus year history in camps and conferences. For 13 years, I was a summertime employee of Camp Trinity, which is the summer camp of the Episcopal Diocese of East Carolina. The last 5 or 6 years of those years, I was the associate camp director, which in our little structure meant that I ran all the day-to-day operations of camp. And all of that happened while I was in undergrad and grad school. And eventually I left academia to take a full-time job at Trinity Center, which is the conference center out of which Camp Trinity runs, as the director of all their Episcopal youth programs, including Camp Trinity. Did that for 5 years before I became executive director of Trinity Center, and was executive director for 14 years until I retired. And amongst my responsibilities, were overseeing all the youth programs at Trinity Center, and that still included Camp Trinity.
Wow. So camp life is like in your blood.
For sure.
That is great. Sounds like a really rewarding journey you've had as well.
Yes, agreed.
Yeah. So tell me a little bit about, your philosophy behind structured play that you learned over the years at Camp Trinity, and why you think it's important now and crucial for children's development.
So if structured play is defined as play with rules and goals and boundaries, and in my mind, what you're talking about is children learning how to work with others in a structured framework towards common goals. And basically, what you can see when you set up structured play for children is that you're helping them with problem solving. You're helping them solve problems as individuals within a group and as members of a team. You're helping them with cognitive skills. You're helping them learn to focus and pay attention, both to the staff that are setting the rules and goals and boundaries of the structured play exercise up, and of their fellow team members as they work to accomplish goals together as a team. And then, of course, just general social skills. How do you cooperate? How do you listen? How do you take turns? How do you follow directions? And to me, maybe the most important of all of those, which is, what does communication look like? Right? If communication always involves both speaking and listening, can you do both? Do you understand that any conversation is easily described as tossing a ball back and forth, everybody getting a chance to both speak and listen, with both being of equal importance? And in general, to me, I always, as a camp director, thought about how you're setting things up for children, but as a secondary goal, you're also teaching staff how to do everything that you're asking them to teach children how to do. And so all of the learning skills that I just discussed for children at camp are also equally important for the staff at camp, and many of them need practice of that as well, right? We'll talk about boundaries
Yeah.
some, but and I will probably say this more than once, but I believe deeply in interactive boundaries for staff with children, and I always believe that the nature of the boundaries matter much less than that they are consistent and that they are consistently applied.
Yeah.
Clear, consistently applied.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. And so as a child, you're just playing. You don't know that all these things are happening in your development. And so you all are really playing the role of educators in a
Yes.
lot of ways to kids while they're playing. And of course, as parents, as we watch our kids, we just, our kids are playing. And yes, we often see some of the, we may see them, they kicked the ball far, or we may see, an argument or something, but I don't think as parents, we even think about all the things that you just mentioned that are actually happening while kids are playing. So let's dissect some of these things in a little bit more detail. So you mentioned boundaries. So let's tease on that thread a little bit more. So, as a program, for kids, like how do you set effective boundaries and goals in a play environment? And how are these elements vital, for the kids in their development?
So if I could just acknowledge something that you said as you were closing up the last question and use it as a segue into my answer to the next question, one of the things that I would say is always that you are looking for the 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 goals, the rules, and the boundaries to be transparent, but also you're basically setting all that in place so that once the children get into the game, they never think about it again unless you have to remind someone in some way as a staff member of, remember, this is something that we set up before. We've already talked about this, right? So if you go and now we're talking about something like effective boundaries and goals in a play environment, how do you set them up? I think what you have to do, first of all, is you have to think about the environment in which the game is going to be played, in which the structured play event is going to happen. So for our purposes, because I always think in terms of Camp Trinity, that's my experience, right? There's a big difference between a structured play event that happens inside the arts and crafts room from a structured play event that happens in the Centrum, which is a big open-aired A-frame building with concrete where you can play foursquare or basketball or games that involve a hard surface, from a structured play event that happens on the field. And in each case, what I think you need to do is you need to understand the environment. You need to set the goals, the rules, and the boundaries up before you actually enter the environment to begin play, right? So there needs to be a transition, right? You need to make very clear what the consequences for um, crossing the boundaries, breaking the rules are. So this is a place where what I would do is I would say to you that when I say that I'm a believer in 3 strikes and you're out, the way that that worked with children was always, in any structured play event, was always, okay, so we're going to talk about what consequences look like. So if first we're going to make sure that we as a staff, whoever the staff members are, name the rules, the boundaries, right? The norms. And then up front, and then in the event, if there is a crossing of one of those boundaries, there will be first an acknowledgement to the child that that's happened. Okay, remember, we're doing this. This is the way that we're going to do it, right? You have not done it the way that we've set up that it needs to be done. Just want to make sure you understand what first you do the communication piece. Let's remind and make sure you understand what the boundaries of the event are. And then the second time, it's probably a quick timeout. Okay, come to the side, sit. This is part of the reason why it's often very important to have more than one staff member involved in the structured play event, because one staff member can continue with the structured play event while the other staff member is off reminding the child in that, let's call it 2 minutes, 5 minutes.
Right.
Right. I want to leave some of that up to the staff member, depending on the group that they encounter, but you're a little brave. Right.
Yeah.
And then the third is, okay, you're going to have to sit out, and it has to be, David, it has to be not 3 different infractions. It has to be a repeat of the same challenge 3 times, and then you sit.
Right.
Right. And one of the funniest things for me eventually about becoming executive director of Trinity Center is I ended up realizing that I was taking almost everything from being a camp director and applying it to running a conference center and a much bigger business. And so with my full-time employees, I called it notification, probation, termination. But it's the same principle. The principle's the same. Right?
Yeah. Wow. Well, there's a lot you sort of made me think while you were giving that answer. The first is there's a lot of different types of play that are happening at camp. It's not just on the court or on the field, but it's in a room, a classroom. If you're doing an art project,
correct,
or if you have a group of kids and they're working on a skit, right? So there's all kinds of play, and so the boundaries are going to be different depending on that. So you're so right about that. I think the other thing that you reminded me of is, yes, the whole idea of, as a parent, a lot of the things that you try to instill on your kids are transferable to managing people in the workplace. As a manager myself, if I had a teammate, for example, that would come to me with an issue for one of their coworkers, I would ask them the same thing I would ask my kids who was coming to me about their sibling. Well, have you talked to your brother about it first? Why have you come to me?
Right. Absolutely. And in fact, one of the things that I would always say to summer staffs, and if you think about it, eventually what you're doing every summer is you're building a team. You will not only provide the very best camp experience for the greatest number of children, but eventually you will find that you will go into any workplace and be able to be a successful member of the various teams that you encounter in that workplace. And trust me, you will do well in the workplace if you can work well in a team, period.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. That's a really good point. So let's talk a little bit more about teamwork and fairness. Can you talk a little bit about, during the process of play, how a camp program fosters the sense of fairness and teamwork?
Hmm. So, if I could first, let me make very clear that, and this is so essential. So, in every summer, what we had was a week of staff training before we put the boat in the water with the first camp to see
Okay.
how it would float. There are things that you have to do during staff training or make clear during staff training in order to run a safe and successful camp summer. But around and amongst those required components was always this being reinforced for the staff. You must be among them, but not of them. By the same token, if the staff are involved in the play event, when there is some kind of crossing of a boundary, it can be poked out immediately and you can go to the 3 strikes and you're out. And you can start at the beginning, right? Okay, remember, this is not something, we don't do it that way, right? And in this case, it would be something like, it would be very clear. It would be something like, let's remember, we're not ugly to each other. Okay.
Right.
Let's remember, we're kind. Let's remember, everyone gets to be involved. Let's remember, everyone has a part to play. But also, eventually, as you talk about teamwork, you have to find your way. And they almost always, the staff did this on their own once you set them loose.
Right.
You have to find your way to acknowledging that cheating is the enemy of teamwork, period.
Right.
And
Right.
you have, and if you're not engaged in interactive boundaries, the cheating can happen and you don't see it.
You didn't even see it. Right.
Right. And
Yeah.
you have to be able to see it because you have to be the one who says, if you're among them but not of them, when it comes time to step out and say, wait a minute, I saw that. That was not appropriate.
Right.
We're not
Right.
gonna, that's not within the rules, the goals, or the boundaries of this structured play event. You
Yeah.
name it and you acknowledge it.
Yeah.
And then you reframe, refocus, and move forward.
Yeah. I think you also bring up an interesting theme as well for parents to think about is the importance of the counselors
Hmm.
that are there because they are the ones that are, among the kids. And the training that they get, which we're talking about, play as far as the participants in that play, but a lot of the counselors are older kids too, so they're
Right.
also learning a lot of skills as well that are going to help carry them into their future lives and careers as well, and all the things that they do. There's I was going to ask about sort of success and failure in play, but maybe there really isn't success and failure in play. But there are certainly kids that are going to be better at some activities than others. In general, what strategies do you sort of use to manage different abilities and sort of making sure that there aren't conflicts and that teamwork continues to be fostered?
Everything about camp is about moving from one thing to another, right? And one of the things that I used to love to say to the staff so that they would reinforce and say to the children is, whatever it is that we're doing, if you love it, you better enjoy it now because we're going to move on to something else in 15 minutes. And if you don't like it, don't worry because we're going to move on to something else in 15 minutes, right? And what that does is it allows space for acknowledgement of skill in any kind of game or structured play event. If we are playing soccer, for example, we played soccer at King, and you have played soccer, and you've played soccer in a rec league or a club league of some sort before you've come to camp, you will be better than plenty of the other children out there. And there's no reason for that to be diminished, right? At the same time, if you're taking over the play event and you're just dribbling around everyone else, somebody on staff needs to pull you out and say, this is a team event. Try to involve your other players. We know you're good. We know you can shoot. We know you can score. Can you pass? Can you facilitate? Can you share? And so if it's a cabin to cabin event, one cabin's going to win. one cabin's going to lose. That's probably going to happen. My feeling was always that that needs to be acknowledged but not emphasized, right? That the point is not who won or who lost, but did the game seem fair? Were people involved? Did they have a good time? And one of the easiest ways to facilitate that is, wow, that was really fun. Congrats, Cabin 2. You did really well. Fred, you were very good. You scored a couple of 3 goals. Okay, time for canteen. You have your bathing suits on? Because it's time for swim lessons next.
Yeah.
Everybody go get in line, go get a drink of water, and then get in line. Let's all have some canteen together as a group. Refocus, move, keep
Yeah.
going.
Yeah. No, that's a good point. I mean, one of my kids played soccer, and sometimes the teams weren't balanced,
Right.
and things. The goals started creeping up on one side, and the coaches would start implementing, I guess, new rules, similar to sort of pulling the child aside. It's like, okay, we have the 5 touch rule. Like, you've got to pass 5 times before you shoot. So I guess kind of in a similar vein of pulling that child along and say, hey, there's other skills that you can practice here, and involve the other team members, right?
And in fact, ultimately, if it is a team game, facilitating other team members benefits you as it benefits the team, right?
Yeah.
Right. This is about the rising tide that lifts all boats. It just
Right.
has to be, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Great. We've talked a little bit about communication already, and how it plays a pivotal role. Can you elaborate a little bit more on sort of how to encourage effective communication between the staff and the campers?
So I think I've already said that all communication consists of speaking and listening, right? So what you'll hear is eventually you'll hear my English grad school background creep right on into the way that I think about sign and signifier and the way that people think about what it is they're trying to say and then verbalize what it is they're trying to convey, right? And I tend often to think about communication the same way that I think about leadership. So let me make an analogy and see if that um, helps clarify how I think about communication. So if communication is about speaking and listening, and both of those things are equally important, then leadership is about both leading and following, and both of those things are equally important. And one of the things that I always used to say to the staff was, so, I'm a bit of a comic book nerd, and so I've always really resonated with the Peter Parker ethos, right? With great power comes great responsibility. And the way that I think about it is, and this is the way you should talk to the staff about leadership, is if you want the power, you're probably not ready for the responsibility, because leadership is more about responsibility than it is about power. Anybody can wield the sword. Can you wear the cloak when everybody's looking at you and you have to be the one to call the shot about whatever? And part of the way that good leadership works is first you learn to follow. If you want people to listen, now we're back to communication, to you when you're leading, then you better listen to them when they're leading. So one of the things that I think about communication is if you want to be heard when you're speaking, you better hear when someone else is speaking. Understand when you have the ball. Now I'm going back to communication as passing the ball back and forth. When you have the ball, you're talking, you want people to listen to you, but then you toss the ball to someone else and they're talking and you want to listen to them. That's what conversation actually is. Nobody keeps the ball. We're not holding forth. We're engaged in something where I say some things and then I pass to you, you say some things and I pay attention and you pay attention. And ultimately, if you roll back to interactive boundaries for staff, when they are among the campers, but not of them, they can reinforce good communication skills very easily. And if a child is having trouble communicating, as many children do, they're learning how to enunciate what they think.
Yeah.
They're learning how to express themselves in a group.
Right.
Right.
I think you bring up, we could probably do a whole discussion just on communication, but I think the concept of active listening, I mean, is part of a conversation. Like, I feel like even as an adult, like we're often listening, but we're already thinking about the next thing to say or how to top the other person in the conversation. And the skill of just just listening, like just be active in your listening, be empathetic in what you're hearing, I think creates a stronger connection, right, with the individual that you're tossing the ball back and forth with. Like, it's no different. Like you say, it's like whether if you're tossing the ball back and forth, there's cues that you're looking at, and it's no different than if you're having a conversation. And like I said, I think we could probably do a whole other episode on the importance of active listening.
I agree with you. And one of the things that I think can be the bane and of a conversation, of good communication, is if you half listen, where you listen to the first half of what the person is thinking, and what the person is saying, and while the person is continuing to speak, you are already engaged in formulating a response, which means you can't be active listening.
So let's talk about, we talked that there's like different activities that are occurring at camp in general. Like, how does a camp sort of select the games and activities, and what sort of considerations are made to ensure that they're inclusive and promote healthy interaction for different skill levels?
And part of the way that you facilitate that is, I always found, is that you allow staff members to bring new ideas, games, structured play events to the table. And you see often I think you play the spaghetti game. You throw it against the wall and see what sticks, right? And one of the easiest ways that games, or certain kinds of games, become mainstays at camp is they happen to stick. And one of the things you'll find is that that the right kinds of games or structured play events tend to stick. They tend to be the ones that stick. So here's a perfect example: Foursquare, possibly one of the silliest, easiest to explain games that's ever been. But one of the things that I love, so Foursquare is a big deal at Camp T. And part of the reason Foursquare is a big deal at Camp T is because I went to an Episcopal school in Raleigh when I was a little kid, and we played Foursquare. And I remembered how much we loved Foursquare, and I and a couple of other staff members at some point introduced Foursquare. And this is decades ago now, but Foursquare became a game. It became a thing. And part of the reason that Foursquare is useful is, at least at Camp Trinity, there's a lot of variations of this now, but roughly you have sessions for elementary school kids, sessions for middle school kids, a session for high school kids, right? And Foursquare is a scalable game, right? You can have Foursquare courts of varying sizes, which we did. You can have Foursquare courts that are smaller for smaller children or younger children, right? But if you think about Foursquare, it's a very easy game to explain. It's a relatively easy game to pick up. It doesn't require a particular skill set. It can be managed in a way in which the rules are different for different age groups, right? And when I say that, what I mean is there are all sorts of variations of Foursquare that involve slapping the ball, coming up over the ball, slamming the ball. You can play survivor versions of Foursquare where people make alliances and team up against other people. But the truth is, if the staff are engaged in interactive boundaries, they can make those norms or rules very clear, even down to different age groups. And we actually had different rule poster boards that we put up for different sessions of camp, depending on age. in which there was some staggering of what was allowed as children got older and got better at Foursquare.
Mm-hmm.
So here's something else I love about Foursquare. There's 4 people that are involved in an active game, and there's a line. And we had a line painted off the Foursquare court, and you had to be behind that line, and your line would form up and you would get back in. So to go back to what we were talking about winning and losing, I guess losing in Foursquare is defined as getting out. And I guess winning in Foursquare is defined as getting to the king square.
Right.
And you're going to get out. If you get to the king square, you're still going to get out. Eventually you get in the king square long enough, and usually there's a staff member who facilitates a kind of like, okay, this person's been in the king square long enough. Let's try to move things along. You might say it to the child, maybe not. But no matter what, if somebody is in the king square for too long, the other children are naturally going to band together in the other squares and try to get that person out. And here's the consequence if you get out. You get back in line.
Get back in line.
And guess what happens in line? You talk. Maybe we got music playing. You engage. But one of the things I love about Foursquare is it's a free, there's an unstructured element to it. You don't know who else is going to be in line, and you might meet somebody, and it could be the first day or the last day, and that can work out fine, right? But one of the most important things about Foursquare is it doesn't require any special skill to be good, and anybody can have a good run. And often, if staff are playing as well, they can help a child who is struggling with confidence have a more successful run in a Foursquare game. Get in and then assist, right? Play the facilitator. And I think that's very useful.
Yeah.
So right. So that's only one example, but that was part of the reason that I believe Foursquare stuck.
I used to love Foursquare. I mean, I remember playing that as a kid, and it was one of my favorite games to play. And this was not even in camp, but just in school on the playground. Unfortunately, kids don't have as much that sort of just go out on the playground anymore. But that was one of the ones that we all loved to sort of band around and play.
It worked out well in terms of it was almost like a healthy balance between structured play and unstructured play. Yeah. Because Foursquare could be played around the margins of a lot of other more structured activities.
All right. So as we wrap up here, let's talk about for parents. I mean, there's a lot that you guys are incorporating into your programs, into the structure at these. But for parents, like any sort of advice or guidance you'd give them to incorporating some of these concepts in their kids' daily play at home.
Well, so when I was a teacher and I encountered, I was a instructor of English at UGA when I was in grad school, and part of what I would often say to anyone who was in my class who said, I don't like to read, or I don't like poetry, right, was, it's not that you don't like to read, it's that you haven't found the right subject yet. Everybody likes to read if they find something they want to read about. And by the same token with poetry can be so frightening to some people. They think that it's a safe and you have to know the code to crack the safe. But really, that's not what it is. It's just you haven't found the poet yet who speaks to you. And eventually, if you look hard enough, I believe you will. By the same token, I believe that the easiest way to encourage structured play at home is find something that suits your child's interests, right? If they're interested in something, encourage them to continue to engage in that. And for me, at least, and this is challenging. I think we're kind of moving to unstructured play from structured play here, but with my own children, I find that they are much less inclined to see going outside and doing whatever as something desirable. They're more inclined to say, what are we going to do? What are we going to do? And it feels like it's partially because it's less likely now that children just get on bikes and go ride around the neighborhood or
Yeah.
go up to the school and have a pickup game of some sort, or play war or cops and robbers or capture the flag or whatever. So you're encouraging them to engage in whatever type of play that they wish. Doesn't really matter. And you're reminding them, I think, that it's not punishment. They're not being forced to do something. You're just encouraging them to do something. And if it is something um, that is, for example, in your house, even if it's outside, I have often found that one of the easiest ways for me is engage myself, get in there with them. Like if I want the boys to throw the frisbee, pick up the frisbee and say, let's go outside and throw the frisbee. And then at some point, once they get going, maybe one of the things that I think is still funny is this happens in our neighborhood all the time. If a couple of children are outside, eventually some other children just wander in, and pretty soon you can do the interactive boundaries thing where you just pull back a little bit, and now they're throwing the frisbee, and maybe then they move on to something else. Whatever it is, let them pick it up and put it down as long as they're continuing to engage. Otherwise, I think you're basically encouraging all the same things that we talked about camp, right?
Yeah.
You're encouraging good communication. You want there to be norms, rules, goals, boundaries. You want to make sure that everybody understands that communication is key, and there's some speaking and there's some listening. And eventually, you just allow them to move from one thing to another as
Yeah.
they're led, because that too is very fun.
Yeah. 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 I think you're right about, I think kids today, for whatever reason, there's less of the just go out and ride your bikes wherever and be home by dinner kind of
Yeah.
stuff. But you also reminded me with my own kids about sort of prompting play, right? So, we would set up some goals in our driveway and we'd
Mm,
play sort of street hockey
mm,
together. And to your point, like other kids would walk by and see us playing, they'd want to join in, and then we'd give them some sticks and they could play. And then, there was a point where our driveway was getting crowded. So then I kind of removed myself and the kids just kind of did their thing. And then, 2 days later, the kids would come back. Hey, you want to play that again? Right. And so
yeah.
it just sort of fostered this play, right? Which was great.
And giving them a nudge, right? That's
Yeah.
what you're saying is like you're just helping. Sometimes I think all you need to do is just be the spark,
Yeah.
get the thing going, right?
Yeah.
And then eventually they'll figure it out, because here's the thing: they still want all the things that children have always wanted in modern society. They sometimes don't know how to name the desire, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, if you provide the spark, what you're saying often just happens, which is other children start to just roll in, because it's like, oh, wait, that looks fun. They're having a good time. Let's play,
Yeah.
right? And
Yeah.
look, play can be both incredibly just fun and wonderful, but it can, as we've discussed, also begin the process of helping children understand what it means to be a part of a larger group and participate in larger group activities and engage in all the kinds of skills that they're eventually going to need to become fully functioning adults.
Yeah,
Right.
exactly. Yeah, that's great. Well, before I let you go here, I want to ask you a last question that I like to ask my guests. If you could, magically give parents a superpower,
Hmm.
what would that superpower be? And since you're a big fan of comics,
Hmm.
I'm sure you have some interesting superpowers in mind.
It's really funny, but you're right. That's a really entertaining question for me. If the lens were wide enough, you could see that I have graphic novels behind me in my library all over the place. But um, I I honestly feel like the 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 great superpower for parents would be, and this is maybe a bit off of what you're nudging for, but it's it would be it's not getting down on your child, on the child's level. It's not that. It's not kneeling, but it is acknowledging that children are children, but that doesn't mean that they are not present with all the thoughts that they have and desires that they have, and that it's worth figuring out some way as a parent to close your mouth and listen and hear what your child is trying to say to you, because they want to communicate. They may not still be developing their communication skills, but I think that one of the easy, and this is true for me, one of the easiest things to fall into is you're trying to educate, you're trying to implement, you're trying to structure, you're trying to set goals and norms and boundaries, everything that we've talked about. And in every way, you're thinking about what it is that you're trying to impart to your child, what you're trying to communicate to your child. And I have found that for me, one of the best gifts I can give my child is to shut my mouth and listen and hear what my child is trying to say to me. Because often they're trying to communicate and they're also trying to figure out how to put words around the thoughts that they're having. And sometimes I have to be quiet for longer than I am necessarily comfortable with in order to hear what they are trying to communicate to me.
Right. So maybe the power of the superpower of active listening.
So here's what you just did. You just put your finger on something that I was circling. Right? That's right. That's exactly what I was thinking, was just being able to actively listen to your child, not think forward about the next thing. I mean, here's the truth about being an adult and being a parent. You're always thinking about the next thing. Right? So maybe it's not only just active listening, and maybe this is inherent in active listening, being present in the moment. Be present to your child and hear what your child's trying to say to you, man.
Yeah, exactly. Well, great. Thank you so much, Penn, for this great conversation. I've enjoyed hearing about the experiences that you've learned over the course of your career at Camp Trinity and fostering play and structure and helping kids build the skills that they need for the 21st century. It's been a great conversation.
I've enjoyed it too. Thank you.
And that wraps up another enriching episode of Parenting Pioneers. Today, we dove deep into the business of play with the invaluable insights from Penn Perry, whose extensive experience at Camp Trinity has illuminated the profound impact of structured play on child development. We explored the significance of setting boundaries, fostering teamwork, and the art of communication in creating a nurturing play environment for our children. A special thank you to Penn for joining us and sharing his wisdom and experiences. Your dedication to the well-being and growth of children through play is truly inspiring. To our listeners, we hope today's episode has offered you new perspectives and strategies to enrich your children's playtime. Remember, play is not just about fun, it's a vital part of learning and growing. If you found value in our conversation today, please consider subscribing to Parenting Pioneers on your favorite podcast platform. Share this episode with fellow parents and caregivers, and don't forget to follow us for more insightful discussions on parenting. Thanks for sharing this moment with us today. We look forward to the next one. Until then, go and be the best parent you can be. We're rooting for you.